Recording in progress.
All right, morning everyone. Friday, 8th of August. On the HL7AU patient summary call, I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country and that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today, which for me is the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. Today, we're going to go through some of the usual business and updates, do a bit of a ballot update, and then we're going to go through a ballot 101. Talk about some of the process. What are your responsibilities? How does it work? This is a bit more of an open information session. So if there's anything you have a question about or that you want to go into more detail on, you can just pop your hand up or put some of the comments in the chat and we'll go through that. And that's really the point of today, is to go through this content. We did one yesterday in the AU Core TDG main call that was largely focused around the ballot for working standard for AU Core. And today's will be a little bit different, though there'll be, still some shared ground, because we're going over what we're doing as a ballot for comment, which is a little bit different in some of what is being asked of the community and how we might respond to that. So let's go through our usual business first. First up, as always, is approval of the minutes. So these minutes were sent round over a week ago. And I'm just going to bring them up and run through that now. So we've got the agenda here. We have our attendees. We've got the slides and our recording, and we've got the decisions that we made, as well as, excuse me, some detailed minutes. We made our final kind of ballot scope decisions on including some of the informative pages, and that was all incorporated and brought through. Does anyone need more time to review these before we look to approve those minutes? Hearing none, I'm happy to entertain a motion. Would anyone like to motion approval of the minutes of our last meeting? Me show who was here in attendance, so that I would prefer a person who was in attendance.
Hi,
to
Danielle,
motion.
I'm happy to make a motion to accept the meeting minutes.
Thanks, David. Is anyone happy to second those?
I'll second it, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Any other questions or comments while we move to the vote? All right, I'm launching the poll now for approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Please select affirmative, negative, or abstain. And if you can't vote but have access to the chat, you can put a +1, whether that's affirmative, negative, or abstain in the chat. And if you don't have access to the chat either, you can say your name and what your vote is. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. Steve, it's a +1 for which choice?
Sorry, +1 affirmative.
Okay, no worries. So with the vote in the chat, that takes it to 8 affirmative, 0 negative, 5 abstain. So the motion carries. Those minutes are passed. Oops, forgot to share. Okay. Okie dokie. So back to the usual business. Reminder again about connectathons coming up really soon. For those of you who missed the opportunity and you haven't yet gone on the wait list, but you'd like to signal that you're interested in attending, you can email events@hl7.com.au to go on the wait list. And if you are lucky enough to have a ticket, but it turns out you can't attend, even if it's the day before, can you please email events@hl7.com.au so that they can release those tickets to the next people who might be able to make it for that event. Other updates and news. So we operate underneath the AU Core TDG. The charter and mission was ratified in yesterday's main call, which goes through not just looking after the AU core spec, but the main call is also where administrative and governance business for the AU core TDG is undertaken, and that was ratified yesterday. Other update is IPS 200 progress. There were 2 outstanding block votes for IPS 200. They've been going through ballot reconciliation of the last ballot. I think the ballot for IPS was actually in December last year. And they've been working through this year on reconciling all of those items and also applying them. Those 2 votes were held this morning and they passed. So the IPS has now completed ballot reconciliation as of this morning. I think I can show the dashboard. Don't know how much they've updated it. If I show a dashboard on what they've been working through. And so now the emphasis for IPS will actually be moving to apply them. Okay, they haven't quite done that, but these things of like triaged or resolved or submitted, these will all now move to a resolution status, and they'll be working over the next month or 2 to make everything that is resolved change required into an applied ticket. The intention from the IPS project is to publish IPS 200 in September, because there is an HL7 International Connectathon and Workgroup meeting. And so they want to have that available there. So that's the target. That would mean that while we don't get this for our September Connectathon, because we're 1st to the 2nd of September, for the December Connectathon, and then through to final publication of AU Patient Summary, we will actually have that baselined published standard available to us. So it's all looking like really good news from that front. The other thing that I'm really happy to report is almost all of the requests that came from this group around obligations or changes have actually been accepted by IPS and have indeed been brought through. We'll see some of those as we move to update our draft. Things like removing the display obligations from the coding parts of the data type profiles. That's all gone away now. They've agreed about that. So it's been really useful, those profile walkthroughs we've done, to generate that feedback that we've brought back in, and that's been discussed and accepted in the IPS project and the patient care work group. So I think that's just really good work on our part, and really appreciate the work in International in taking in that feedback, walking it through, and making sure that that gets socialized with other jurisdictions who've also accepted that feedback. So that's fantastic. Last bit on actions. There was one action that we weren't sure whether or not that was done. And it has been. Heath reported that was done, and it's commented on in the minutes in particular, so we can say that's it. There are no longer any outstanding actions that are coming out of any of our meetings. We're up to date on that. All right, before I move on to a ballot update, I just want to check, point of order, and I forgot to ask, is there anything else that people want to talk about in this meeting or add on to the agenda? Let's get people's hands up. Nope. All right. If you do think of anything, just pop your hand up at any time, and we'll go through it. All right, so let's go to ballot update. So out of the AU Core TDG, we're a project operating underneath that. So there's the AU Patient Summary FHIR IG. Our ballot publication was published on Monday of this week, which was the agreed deadline. And so this is published and now available. And I'm just going to walk through here because there's a couple of items that are worth mentioning. In our last call, we talked about a few outstanding changes not applied. One of those was applied, which was about SPCU. But these two on terminology are still unapplied. We will see them later on. There's a potential for us to actually release an updated snapshot for the September Connectathon. If these are available, we might include them then. However, there's also a reason that we might look at doing a September snapshot in addition to this one, and that's because of the IPS 200 work. So we had to publish a ballot baseline before the last set of changes for IPS have been agreed. And what that means is that there are differences now. So IPS is going to go ahead and start applying all of those changes. And we are obviously frozen at the time that we published this ballot for comment. So if we go ahead and test on this one, we aren't really testing on the latest IPS 200, or really maybe even the final 200 normative baseline. I think we'll talk about it in our next call around the significance of the changes and whether or not this group feels it's worth it to try to release an interim for the purposes of testing at the Connectathon. And if we do, we'll go ahead and try to release that snapshot. But if we think that the changes aren't really that big, we might just hold off on that and not go through the administrative overhead of trying to release an extra. We can talk about it in the next call. So that's, I guess, some of the call outs in this note to balloters, that these things aren't applied in this snapshot. But otherwise, this is out and available for review now and for testing. People can load that, people can check on it. Because we are dependent on IPS continuous integration build, that does have that caveat that this particular IG doesn't have an NPM registry package. There is a package. You have to come to this specification in order to download it, but it is not available in the NPM register, the HL7 FHIR one, because it will not register anything that depends on a CI build. So that's just how it is. This will be the last time that happens, assuming IPS does publish in September. Are there any questions about that or about this release and how you get access to it? Which, thanks, Shelley, for popping that in the chat. All right, let's move on. So voters registered. So there are 59 voters registered formally for the ballot for comment. Of those, there's 9 individuals, and there are 50 voters who represent an organisation. So, for example, I'm one. I'll be representing CSIRO, which has an organisational membership. There are 14 unique organisations who've got voting representatives. And so we're about to go into the ballot period, which is the 4-week period that it's open for people to provide feedback. That closes on the 7th of September. So it'll be just after we have the Connectathon, which is the 1st to the 2nd of September. So I think it's actually at the end of that week, the Sunday of that week, that the ballot period closes. And then we move into ballot reconciliation. The target there is that by the end of October, we have gone through all of the pieces of feedback and made decisions on what, if any, changes we're going to make in Patient Summary R1, so that we have enough time to put all of those together into a snapshot and take it into the December Connectathon to do another round of testing, at least the normative changes. We might not have completed all the informative ones, especially if there's any kind of guidance sections that are quite complex. But that's sort of the target for what we'd like to do. Yeah, that's the overall timeframes. AU core and our downstream specifications. So by this point, there'll be no further changes coming from IPS. And both AU base and AU core are also targeting to finish any changed impacts by that date. So there's a good likelihood we will actually be able to incorporate any potentially normative changes coming through, including those ones that didn't manage to get applied now. Thanks, Michael, for updating the chat to let us know that they will be available and published in NCTS. So we might actually be able to go ahead and have a fully aligned normative baseline for the December Connectathon, which would be great. All right, any questions about timeframes and kind of what we're going to try to hit in terms of targets? Alrighty, so let's talk about Ballot 101. You start with the slide, and if you're going to be part of the Ballot for Working Standard in February, you're going to see it all over again, because we always really have to start with what is the ballot, where are the documents that govern it. It's a formal process, and it does both formal process in terms of capturing comments, but it's also forming the consensus body through a HL7AU membership for a standards development organisation, and gives us approval to publish things at particular levels of standard. There are a lot of rules that govern the types of ballots, how do you form a consensus group, what are all the timeframes, things like how long a notice must you give the community before you can even vote on a ballot comment. They're all written down, and they're across primarily 4 documents. The top one's the HL7 International Governance and Operations Manual. That sets out all the rules for HL7 International and affiliates, and that is adopted and adapted in Australia through our affiliate process. And then we have some downstream process documents around balloting. It has a nice little swim lane diagram and a workflow with different responsibilities. And we have a decision-making practices document that covers how do we make decisions in this group, and then how does a balloting body make decisions. We use this in every single meeting. We just made a decision around minutes, and every time we in this group decide what are we going to do about the feedback that has been provided from the community, we will be using this in every single time we make a decision. And the last one I'm calling out there is the bylaws. The bylaws govern membership and rights for individuals and organisations, and plays a lot into who is eligible and the numbers that can be provided. Last bit is for those people who are on the call who are balloters. So you're either an individual or an organisational member. There is a seminar for voters on Friday, the 15th of August at 10 a.m. If you're not a ballot voter, you can still join in anyway and see what it's all about. But that's what that one's there, information session, and you can pop your hand up, ask questions. It will be recorded and it will be available as per usual on YouTube if you just can't make that time frame. Oops, just clicked on a thing. Okay, but let's talk about ballot for comment. Oh, Heath.
Are invites being sent out for that seminar, or?
No, I don't think they are. Oh, is Brett on the line? I don't think he is.
Yes, I will send out a direct message to all the people signed up for ballot at least.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Brett. Okay, ballot for comment. I have to stress this bottom bullet point. This is not a ballot for going, okay, let's publish this standard. There is no authorization to publish at all. This is a review for the purpose of further development. We are going out to get input. We're going out to get input on the direction on the work that we've been doing over the last few months. And we're going out to members outside of our project. We're looking at things like, is it clear what we're trying to do here? Where are our gaps? Provide some feedback on the direction on what should a release of AU Patient Summary include, including where we've been. Are we too overly prescriptive? Are we missing things? Is there guidance that is essential? Are there rules that are there that we're not enforcing that will actually be critical to making an AU Patient Summary work for the Australian use cases? So we're going out for all of that kind of feedback. And it's really important that by wider community, we don't just mean within Australia. We will be directly seeking feedback from the IPS project to get them to have a look at this and comment on our localization and confirm that we are valid, and to identify any risks or things that they want to provide feedback on, and also where they think we've done a really good job. That's important to know. We'll be looking at multinational implementers. We've been paying, I think, a great deal of attention to the fact that Australia sits within a complex environment. That means that we need to understand how these things will work, not just within our borders, but also across border. And so we'll also be seeking some feedback from other jurisdictions that have interest in patient summaries and getting some of that feedback around cross-jurisdictional implementation. That feedback, we will then come all back to this. This set of fortnightly calls will be going through every single piece of feedback that is providing a direction or a feedback on change, and considering what do we do with that? Where are we deferring items? Where are we saying, no, that isn't actually the point of an AU patient summary, or we don't agree and won't make that change? And then what changes are we making? How does this shape the direction before we go out for our ballot for working standard, which is our proposal to say, well, we've done it. Here it is. Please approve and let us publish. But that's next year. This year, we're saying, please have a look at this and let's work through all of this feedback. So, important points here. All communities invited. I know we've just talked about review and sign up, and that is really important, and that allows us to form an official ballot baseline with a whole bunch of voters, but all community is invited to review and provide feedback, and feedback is submitted through raising JIRAs. It's that there's a footer on every single IG page that has propose a change. That will take you straight to JIRA, so you can raise that. You do need a HL7AU account. And for everyone on the line, you do not have to be a voter to contribute. While that's targeted at the wider community, everyone on the line, all project participants should take this opportunity to contribute feedback into that. And we will look through all of those items as we go through that ballot reconciliation period to consider, where do we go from here? What work do we need to do in order to complete a first release of patient summary? Any questions on that? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about voting. I'm going to talk about voting because we need to interpret it in this group to understand what has been voted on and what all these different votes actually mean, so that we can take that direction and feedback from our ballot, our consensus body, the balloters. So voting will happen by every single voter overall. So it'll say, AU patient summary ballot for comment. Please have a vote. I'll go through what those are in a second. And typically, and I forgot to update this, this is done at a working standard. It's a little bit of it doesn't really matter for ballot for comment because there's no way we can publish this as a working standard. But you can vote overall, or rather you have to vote overall. That's mandatory. A balloter can also vote on individual items. This is optional in general. So a balloter can say, affirmative, I love what you're doing, but I also have some feedback on what I think you should address before you publish. So that can be affirmative on overall, and they can also go, here's my specific pieces of feedback. I vote affirmative on those. Please consider these for change. So that's why this is optional. It might happen. And so let's go into what the actual voting overall does. Every voter will vote, and when they start, they're given a no vote. A no vote basically means that someone has not voted. And if they don't change, as in they don't log in and actually record an affirmative, a negative, or abstain, their vote just sits at no vote. There's always a percentage of people who, for whatever reason, maybe differences in leave schedules or something else, means that they've not been able to actually vote. And hopefully that percentage is low, but there's always a certain amount. It doesn't count towards ballot quorum. ballot quorum we care about when we're doing for working standard or normative. For the purposes of ballot for comment, it doesn't apply. Abstain is where a balloter has actually gone in and changed their vote to abstain. Abstain typically means the balloter has done something. They've reviewed at least some part of the document, but they're not able to form a position on whether or not they think it should be approved. So they won't vote affirmative or negative for a number of reasons. Maybe they've run out of time. Maybe they're just not comfortable. And so they'll go to abstain. Affirmative is that they are happy for this to be published, they're overall comfortable, and they may have a whole number of feedback that they think needs to be addressed before then, but it's still affirmative. Negative is that at least one piece of feedback is of a sufficiently significant issue, usually design choices, overly prescriptive items, and they want it's basically a blocker saying this has to be addressed before this can be published, that it's sufficient to block publication. So for ballot for comment, we usually get a lot of negatives, as you'd expect. This is a ballot for comment. We're early in the stage here. And a lot of reviewers will come through and identify the things that they're concerned about. And that's why we hold a ballot for comment, so that we can draw out the feedback from project participants and from wider community to identify those significant issues we need to address before publication. So yeah, don't feel concerned if you see a lot of negatives. That is part of the point of a ballot for comment, is to draw all of those out now so that we have the space to work through and then test those changes. Does that make sense? So let's talk about individual pieces of feedback. There's affirmative and negative on that. Here's what we're going to be given to look at. Let's start from the bottom. So when you're raising this, you don't have to be a balloter. Again, everyone can provide feedback, and please do. The bottom are comments. Comments are usually just statements that don't request a change or require any response. Mostly those are positive. They're comments on things that people appreciate and would like to see continue going forwards. That kind of feedback is great. You don't usually get too many of those. It's really easy for reviewers, I think, to identify the set of changes they want. That being said, we are a number of the specifications will get a few comments here and there. AU Core has gotten them before, and we might or might not see them on AU Patient Summary Ballot for comment. So wherever we get them, the co-chairs will bring it into the TDG, but we don't actually have to make a decision. It's just for information. FYI, this was a comment about the spec. The next one is the question. Again, it's not asking for a change. And I will say for project participants, if you actually have a question and you want it answered, it's better to use Zulip generally. Use chat.fire.org in order to ask your question and get a response relatively quickly. But if you need, for whatever purposes, a formal documentation of a response with a formal, official response back from co-chairs, you can use JIRA to raise a question that gets deliberated upon with a formal response back, rather than the Zulip community. It's an option. We don't see very many of these because it's not your best way to get quick feedback or quick answers to your questions. And then there's these two. A technical correction is where you spot a defect. Raise those at any time where you think there's something wrong. I wouldn't bother with the typographical stuff for ballot for comment. As we've talked about in our meetings, the level of quality of editorial nature isn't there yet in a ballot for comment because it's not worth it. We expect there to be quite a bit of change, and there will be a proper copy editing review as we get prepared for a ballot for working standard. But if you spot errors, maybe in an example, SNOMED code is inactive, or there's an actual incorrect fire path or something else, you can raise a technical correction. Don't vote on these if you're a balloter. just raise it. These always rise to the top of the pile and are always considered immediately, because technical corrections are, if they're accepted, are defects and they get fixed immediately. And then here's what we'll see in all our calls, and that's a change request. This is what we're going to be seeing, and this is what will come through. It is essentially feedback. It could be an enhancement. It could be a correction. It could be an addition. And it could be where someone's actually saying, no, we've been overly prescriptive. This needs to be relaxed, or this terminology is incorrect, or something else needs to change. And this is really what we're going out to the community to find out. What is all your feedback where there are changes suggested that need to be worked through before we look to complete Patient Summary R1? Every single one of these will be brought to these fortnightly calls to make a decision on, as a group, on what will we do with it. Will we defer it? Do we say, no change will be made, the content is actually correct? Or do we actually go, no, there's a change that has to be made here, and let's agree on what that change is? So we're going to go through those. I don't know how many we'll get. The last ballot for comment that I worked on was AU Core. There were 198 JIRA issues submitted. Of those, I think around 100 were change requests. So there could be quite a decent amount, given the community interest in Patient Summary, for us to come together and try to reconcile. That's just a quick note for voting on feedback. That's what I was saying about affirmative and negative. Whether or not you vote, if you're a balloter and you're voting on individual JIRAs, it doesn't matter whether you vote affirmative or negative in terms of this group addressing it. Every single change request will be looked at, and we will make a decision on what we do. And whether it's affirmative or negative doesn't change that position. Affirmative or negative tells us the opinion of the balloter as to whether or not this is a blocking issue for publication. So don't do it on like typographical kinds of things. What you really want to do is go, this is a significant blocker. It's preventing Patient Summary from fulfilling its intended purpose. And it's giving us an indication of significance to the community's needs. That's what that's doing. So it would be great, but it's still a way to go, I think, for people to understand the difference between affirmative and negative. Any questions on that bit? Righto, let's move on to the actual what happens. So what happens is from Monday, balloters and the wider community start reviewing the specification and they raise feedback. So they'll start having the JIRAs come in, and when they do, the co-chairs and the facilitators who share that, thank you folks on the line for that, will be triaging these. So they'll go through and they'll look at these, they'll identify duplicates, they'll work out, is this actually in scope of Patient Summary, or has this been raised on, I don't know, you want to change to a LOIC display name, which obviously we don't control, and trying to start to organise how to bring things through to this fortnightly call. While they're doing that, they'll also start reaching out and communicating with the group that meets fortnightly, so us, as well as individual TDG members, to start working through resolutions and start to prepare what is officially called a preliminary reconciliation package. So for the general voting, what should happen is there's some kind of proposed disposition as a proposed way forward to be considered by the TDG. And the co-chairs do all the organisation and assign people actions and prepare meetings and all that kind of thing to ensure we can get there. I think maybe an extreme example of that is how we were running the fortnightly conformance sessions, where we all got together, those people who came to put forwards a proposal to this call on how should conformance work. for ballot for comment. That's an example of coordinating and preparing a proposal and then coming to this fortnightly call. So a lot of that will happen in the back end individually with different calls, especially if you're the person who raised feedback. Be aware you will be asked to help out in resolving that. And then we will come through in our fortnightly calls and potentially in electronic votes, going through and voting on what are we doing with it? Are we deferring it? Are we working on it? Are we saying no change? And when all of that's done, so we've worked through every single issue and made a decision, the IG editors are going off and then trying to apply that. And at the same time, HL7AU will contact balloters to do this thing that is called withdrawing votes. That's that closing the feedback loop. So what that is all of the people who voted, all the balloters are contacted to say, you can now indicate whether or not you're happy with the resolution that this group has come to. And they do that by withdrawing their vote. And that lets us know whether or not the balloter was satisfied with the resolution or whether they're dissatisfied and still think it hasn't been addressed to their satisfaction. And then if we weren't ballot for comment, there would be this next step on, has ballot passed, can we publish? But it's not applicable for ballot for comment. So that's really the kind of overall high level steps on what happens next. All right. I'm going to skip through a bunch of these, and I'll really only talk through some of the detailed ones. And when we come to our first reconciliation session, I'll run through a couple of like our procedure steps there and why is anything different to what when we usually just make a decision. So we'll have it the first time we run through ballot reconciliation. But before we do that, I just want to do a quick confirmation. Here's what co-chairs do in triage. We go through and we try to group things together. So what's a question and answer? And we do, there's a comment in the chat, which I think goes to part of also what the co-chairs do, is that for questions, that's meant to be something that shouldn't trigger a change. But sometimes when a balloter or anyone is raising a piece of feedback, they might raise it as the wrong thing. Like it might be raised as a comment, but say, please add must support on this element. That's clearly not a comment, that's a change request. So part of what the co-chairs do, because we have JIRA administration rights, is to run through all the issues and just make sure they've all been raised as the right thing. And we might need to change their type so that we can process those correctly. So you might get asked questions about that if you've raised something and the co-chairs think, oh no, actually this isn't a question, it's a change request. You might be contacted to confirm that that's what it should be. We'll look at scope. We'll look at then trying to organise things into priority and start to trying to work out who and how should be involved in resolving these. Sometimes we might identify things that need to go back to the clinical focus group and start to contact the editors of AUCDI to try and tee them up for meetings as well. And do all that kind of scheduling. That's a lot of what happens in review and triaging of comments. And we're going to meet weekly and spend, an hour or so trying to go through that. One of the big things we have to look at is what's out of scope. We're a downstream specification. Patient Summary sits on top of core and IPS. Core sits on top of base, and all of those specs sit on top of FHIR, which includes in it also THO, which is FHIR terminology stuff, and the extensions pack. And then the styling and all the pretty colors sits on top of HL7AU templates, actually. So sometimes there might be something that's raised, but it's actually sourced in something else. So one of the things we have to do, is as co-chairs go through and work out where is the source of this issue? Is this something this group can make a decision on? Or do we actually need to direct that feedback back? If it belongs in base or core, it will just go straight into their ballot scope. So we'll change the target of the spec. It'll still count as like a ballot. It needs to be solved within this ballot, but it moves, it moves decision-making to the source artifact. If it belongs in IPS, then while we'll move that to IPS, they're finishing their cycle. So that won't get addressed until the next release of IPS. And similarly, obviously, with the fire spec or the fire extensions pack and THO, they all have their own release cycles. Fire spec update would be R6. THO and fire extensions pack are quicker, more like I think 3 month or so turnarounds. The fire extensions pack is actually just going out to ballot now in September. So anything we identify in the fire extensions pack actually has a reasonable chance of completing in our time frame. So we can see changes happen there, which is nice. The other thing that can happen is people could contact us and go, hey, someone raised an issue, but it actually sits with you guys. And so issues could come in. I think that's really unlikely. We're at the moment a leaf spec, so there are no HL7AU specs, and I'm not yet aware of like an official specification outside of this that's in its publication stage either. So it's unlikely we'll get that, but it could happen. Any questions on that? Does that make sense about how we're going to have to also look at scope and move issues around to their source? All right. I'm going to move past that. I already talked about it. We'll come to that in terms of actual reconciliation. Actual reconciliation. This would be pass or fail. It's not relevant for comments, so we can move past that. Aha. I just really want to emphasize these. These are things that we see people get wrong consistently, and I just want to re-emphasize this. Ballot voters can vote on any open issue. So part of why we ask the wider community to provide feedback is to add to the list of open feedback that balloters can consider. Then they can mark certain items that have already been raised as affirmative or negative. And it also helps us reduce duplicates, frankly. The other one I want to re-emphasize is if you see a defect, raise it as a technical correction, rises to the top of the list. We will fix it if it's a defect. And if it's not an actual defect, but is a design change, then it will be triaged by the co-chairs to be a change request rather than a technical correction. And last bit, you don't have to vote negative to get your feedback addressed. Certainly right now, you just have to raise your feedback. And if you vote affirmative, all items that are voted on, affirmative or negative, will come to this call to be addressed. Okay, so we're really at the end of the process and responsibilities, and I'm just now calling out this area for people. This is going to be the area that all announcements and everything will be kept up to date on. After this call, we'll put a link to this information session and any HL7 AU guidance, and we'll keep all of this up to date on the summaries. We'll also have the JIRA filter for all our issues so that you can see all the open issues that are relevant at any time if you want to have a look at how many there are and what's involved. Anytime we have a vote coming up, whether it's electronic or in a particular call, we're going to list it here so it has all the pieces of feedback and what dates they're going to be on. And then we're also going to keep a track of what votes have we actually made and has it already been applied to the specification. So that's what this area is. The last bit it's going to do is where the AU Core TDG co-chairs will do triage. There will be a child page linked off here. And every bit of triage we're doing of going, oh, no, I think that's actually a change request rather than a question. We're going to capture the results of all our conversations and who do we need to assign actions to. And that will be publicly visible because this is, you know, public awesome, not secret squirrel. Everything is open and available. So there'll be a child page there that if you're super interested in going, what are the co-chairs doing? You can go have a look at it. And I think that's everything that I wanted to highlight for people about Ballot. Before I stop talking about it, does anyone have a question? Something I've not answered or something you want maybe a bit more information on? All right. Sounds good. Let's just wrap up then with a what's next. This is going to be a bit of a shorter call because we're in a bridging state between having done the work and released this and then having a set of feedback to work through. So next call, we'll give some updates on the ballot and usual business. We haven't finished AU patient summary composition, and if there's interest, we can now walk through that. And I'd like that reflection and walkthrough to show any of the latest IPS changes in there so that we can see what that actually means for us now. We do need to be talking through our patient summary testing scenarios and priorities to feed into the connectathon. And we'll also therefore have that discussion on, do we release an updated snapshot? Is it worth it to publish one, given the nature of the changes? And then we might actually be starting to go through ballot reconciliation. There might have been a number of issues that are ready for us to already start discussing and voting on in that call. So that's the current agenda. Is there anything else people would like to add to this agenda? All right, hearing nothing, I'm happy to end the call there today, unless there's anything that people would like to go through now.
Doesn't
Okay.
sound like it, does it?
No, it doesn't. All right, well, let's wrap it up there then. I appreciate everyone coming in for the ballot conversation. And it looks like we will be starting ballot reconciliation in our next call, which is pretty exciting to see what the community feedback is.
Can't wait. Thanks very much, Danielle. Love your work.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to
Thanks.
you in the next call.
Thank you.